Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Spanish United Radio. I'm your host, Enrique Sanchez. Tonight we have a guest. Would you be kind enough to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yes, my name is Terry Paulson, and I am a psychologist by training, a clinical psychologist. Also have a master's in theology, and really I've been involved in writing a number of books. One of which really dealt with one of my ancestors, who, story is what penetrates. It's what grabs people, and I have used that as a professional speaker. That's how I made my living. I would speak to associations and conventions. But at the back of my heart, I'm always looking for stories that penetrate, because you're trying to get people to read, trying to get people to listen. And when you have a good story, it has a way of connecting to the stories you've had in your own life. And that's where connection happens, and that's how things are retained. I have been involved in writing for a number of years, and the current book that I have been working on is called Sweden's Gentle Giant. And it refers to someone my grandmother would tell me and my cousins and my brother about in the 1950s, and we all thought was a myth. And then we found out he was real. And so once we found that out, and we happened to be in Sweden, where our heritage came from, on Ancestry, I'm probably 98% Swedish background. So when we
Hmm.
went to Sweden, we happened to go the first time we went at the time when they were celebrating this relative's 200th birthday. So we were
That's
interviewed in
impressive.
the newspapers, we were involved, but it was quite a story, and it got me involved in being able to share that. And I think with your audience, I don't care what the heritage is you're involved with, we grow up hearing story. We hear about family members, we hear about people they respected, and the opportunity to read about them and hear more about them is it gives us a sense of unity and a sense of purpose. People we can look up to.
Yeah, I think it's very important because, especially now where Hispanics, particularly in the United States, are going through identity crisis because Hispanics were not a race for an ethnicity. So I feel that there is like a division to try to get Hispanics to identify as one or the other. One of the things that we do is we try to promote culture over color. That's our slogan in Spanish United. And at the same time, we want all Hispanics, regardless of their background, to work together for the empowerment of the people. So you're right. I feel that the more people read and know about their heritage and their ancestors, the less likely people are to divide them. And I think it's very important, because Hispanics, we tend to be visual people, and we also have a history of different stories and myths and folklore. So, how would you, for example, encourage educators that want to encourage Latino children to be more involved in reading to make it exciting or fun for them?
Well, I think very similar to this particular book, you want to find people that are intriguing, that are unique in some way, and at the same time responsible. Someone that they can look up to and learn something from. I've always found there was a great movie. It's called Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. It was a comedy, and this guy would keep telling stories, but his co-rider in the car would keep saying, usually stories have a point. If it doesn't have a point, you wonder, why are you telling it? And I think whenever you're trying to bring a culture alive or a family alive, you look for stories of individuals that did something or aspired to something or had wisdom that could be incorporated and shared in a way that inspires, that enlightens, or in some way brings people together in a way that celebrates the culture. In this case, one of the people who read my book is a woman who has a Scandinavian store up in Kingsburg, California, and it's known as kind of a community where Swedes would gather in California, and they're having a Scandinavian festival in May. And she just called me today, in fact, and she said, I have an artist, and he is making a huge cutout that is the size of put the Torpehair, this relative that you have, because he was 7'3", 350 pounds. Now, some of them estimated he was 9'11", but I don't think so. I think that was an exaggeration. But they're creating this cutout so that when we come together in May, when people come up to the store and they get a chance to look at the book, they can stand next to the statue and realize how tall this guy was. And then they're interested in hearing, well, what was he like? And how was he with his neighbors? I think we need to find ways that celebrate our unique culture and at the same time can communicate the need to come together within any culture or any community, a country, and work for the common good. So it's know who you are, but celebrate where you've come from.
Absolutely, and I feel that it's very important that one knows their background that could keep the tradition alive. As with many cultures and many communities, aside from keeping themselves as an identity, it's also important to emphasize the importance of tradition because tradition explains who we are and where we come from. Let it be orally, let it be written. Traditions are good to have. One thing that intrigued me about the story when you were speaking through Zoom, that's when I met you there at the conference, is the history and folklore that Sweden has, similar to Norway, they have a lot of fantasy and folklore that really excites the minds of many people, particularly children. And I think that would be something that I would love to see many Hispanic children that have a lot of imagination, but under many circumstances, they don't really have the opportunity to make that imagination grow. So I feel that, a story like that would definitely, interest Latino children to read.
Well, Enrique, one of the things that kind of fits with the mystical quality of fantasy is when people can't explain something, they have to find a reason to be able to communicate to their children or people. Well, how did that happen? And since they didn't have a good explanation as to why this Johan's Abraham's son was 7'3", in fact, by the time he was 9 years old, he was as large as his father. So they're looking at this kid and they're going, how did this happen? Well, the story emerged, and I think it comes out of the desire to create an explanation that number one is fun. All right. So this explanation is that there was a troll, and one of the things you find in a Scandinavian culture, whether it's Norway or within Sweden, they had talked about trolls, these little beings that
Hmm.
populate the area and can be sometimes mischievous, have amazing qualities. Well, the story was told that a troll formed himself into the body of an old woman. And
Hmm.
this old woman came upon this frail boy and asked if he would like a pretzel. Well, I mean, there's a classic story. Kids always want some food. So he accepts the pretzel, but because he was small and he was relatively weak, which was part of what happened. He was early on as a child, he tended to be very weak. So he eats by the story that is told, he eats part of the pretzel, but because he's small and he's kind of weak, he could only eat half of
Hmm.
the pretzel. So the woman says to him, oh, so sorry that you could only eat half of the pretzel, because that means you will only have, when you grow up, the strength of 10 men. If you
Hmm.
had been able to eat the whole pretzel, you would have had the strength of 20 men. So in light of that, when they tried to explain why is this young man so powerful and so strong and so tall and growing to do the things he was able to do, they came up with a story that fit their culture. In this case, it was trolls and how the troll had transformed himself, and they came near the farm and found the boy. But well, none of the parents saw the troll, none of the parents saw the woman, but they saw the evidence of this young man growing. And the first story that was really told about him was when he was a teenager. He was a teenager, and his dad, on this area, the farm, small land, which is in southern Sweden, is essentially timberland, and farms. They do glass blowing occasionally in that
Mm,
area. But since it's largely a farm area, they the his father asked the neighbors to come over and help because it was a very moist area, and so they had to lift the house up to put sills or boards at the bottom. And already, this son of his, this John's Abraham son, had worked with his father to get the lumber, shape it into wood that could be used for these sills. Well, he called all the neighbors there to help pick up the house on each corner so they could put in these sills underneath so it would elevate the house. Well, as soon as all these neighbors got there, they were ready to help. But instead of needing to be helped, what reportedly happened is this this boy from Putatorp, this large boy, went over, picked up the end of the house and lifted it up. And all the men had to do was change the logs. He got to the other end, lifted that up. So
hmm
the story started going. They called him the boy of Putatorp, which is the area or the region that was there. And so stories started to be collected of what he was able to do and how he treated other people within the community. And literally, there are pictures and art that have been done in the area which captured his existence. I mean, they showed that in the community square, they had all the leaders and famous people in the community, and you see this one guy who's significantly bigger than other, and that's Jones Abraham's son. Put the Torp hair, the boy from Put the Torp. So you start to, once the story's there, then they start collecting other stories. And what it does, I think, is it entices people to share. Um, and I think that becomes part of what unites a family because all of a
hmm
sudden you've got stories to tell about a relative who is somewhat special, and that kind of brings you together.
Mm. Interesting. As your time as your years as a psychologist, like have you ever dealt with children that struggle, let's say academically or with reading, and they would have anxiety and stress? Like what methods or ways you would do to try to help them improve, let's say, with their anxiety if they didn't want to read or they were dyslexic, like what were the methods that you would like improve to encourage them to do better?
Well, I think the number one thing, and I think it's so lacking in today's societies, is that we have given over story to television, to visual images, to Hollywood, and so what we do is we sit kids in front of a television, and they're actually limited to what image that is able to be created. Telling a story or reading a story to a child allows them to develop their imagination, their ability to fill in that image with their view of what a sky looks like, their image of what a big man would look like, and you can describe it and talk about it. I remember with my son, who he's a minister in Ohio, and he tells stories all the time, and sometimes it's about me, which is downright upsetting. But um, we used to tell him stories. We would read books to him, and then gradually, as he got a little older, we would say, "Oh, now you know this part," because he got to know some of the stories because he would hear them off. He said, I want to read that one again." And then as he started to learn words, we'd have him read just a line. What's that say? What's that word? And you gradually let them know that which they enjoy, they can enjoy on their own. And I think it takes work. I think as a parent to convince children to read, because I think typically now kids are waiting until they're in school before they're really getting the requirement to have to read, and oftentimes they've dumbed that down. They aren't having them read as much. So I think it's number one. They love it when parents read to them. And that way you get to pick the books that you want to bring to life for your kids. What's the story that you want told? What's the truth that you want to come out of that? And you can ask them, what did you learn? And what was special about this person? So I think by asking questions, um, by letting them know occasionally, in some ways, this guy seems a lot like you. You're pretty brave, or you want to recognize the attributes in your child that relate to the heroic side of whatever that story is. What is it about that story? I mean, the tragic thing, I think, in our culture today is what gets the news are negative images. It,
Right.
it's it's like if it bleeds, it leads. If it's something bad, and so you end up identifying with the negative within a culture when you realize a vast majority of people are good people.
Right. Of
And
course.
there are plenty of good stories, but it's hard to compete unless you work at it. I mean, that's the I would just encourage people to look for books that have a message, that provide a model that in some ways you can see in your children and you can recognize it and say, they're like you. You someday you may do this kind of thing. And I think it builds a positive expectation. And then we begin to recognize, even as we go through our day, you just did something a lot like put the torpe hair. I mean, my grandmother, and I mean, she had a twinkle in her eye when she would tell these stories. And she would give a Swedish massage. I don't know if there's a Spanish massage that you get or not, but something that was comforting. She would knead our back, and she would rub it and give us this. I didn't even know if there is a Swedish massage, but that's what she called it. And she would then tell these stories. And it was such a warm experience that we remembered and we treasured it. And then when we were parents, we were in a position to tell those same stories to, in my case, to my son. And he's a great storyteller. I believe as a professional speaker, it's story that penetrates. Story penetrates into your memory because it reminds you of events that you've had. Oh, I've been there, or I've
Mm.
had something similar. And all of a sudden, you can have something happen that reminds you of your story. And then the story you read them is connected to that because it was a similar event. And then the wisdom with that is allowed to be transferred to that person. I mean,
Abs Absolutely.
I mean, I'm a strong believer, so I'm a strong Christian, and there is a reason I think that Jesus told so many stories because stories allow you to connect with individuals, allow you to realize there's something about this person that made a difference, and maybe you can emulate that. And and you realize he didn't just lecture people, he invited them into his world of experience and people
Hmm.
that he knew. And sometimes he surprised people. I mean, you you're a tax collector with your group?
Hmm.
I don't think I want a tax collector. Well, there's nothing wrong with tax collectors. They're an important part of our society too. The same thing with police, the same thing with
Right.
variety. I mean, it's like I don't like demonizing people. I like lifting up people. And I think when you do that, you allow to lift up the reader. You allow them to be,
Absolutely.
and that's the key thing.
Absolutely. And my organization that I started 6 years ago, we try to uplift the Hispanic community, particularly because right now, with the way the climate is in our country, many Hispanics are being demonized by who we are. So and more than ever before, it's very important to try to lift up our people. Like when I have conversations or events with members of my organization, I always try to uplift them and tell them, look, regardless of how society views you, all you can do is be a better person, try to fight against those stigmas through education, through community involvement. and
Yeah.
by giving back to the community. I think it's very essential in dispelling stereotypes. And I feel that by doing so, it could cause critics to re-examine their perception of a person and learn to distinguish by individuals, not by a collective. Because unfortunately, Hispanic people were considered people of color. So, we have to try to prove, we have to really try to prove to others that we are not what people perceive us to be. So I think it's very important that as an organization like mine, we try to uplift the community, let it be by creating workshops, let it be by doing outreach work. Like a few days ago, I did an outreach work in Sun Valley, California, where I took toys for the kids. I wasn't able to do it on Tree King's Day, but I was able to take the toys out to the kids. So, that's how we promote uh giving a positive perspective, positive image of the Hispanic community in the United States.
Well, and I would probably say, I'm just one person, obviously, that when I think of a Hispanic community, I think of hard workers, I think of family, I think of faith, um, I think of people who do stick together, who have uh, not an allegiance, but a sense of culture that they celebrate. And I remember going down to Alvera Street, you know, and the music. Um, Same thing when I went to as a speaker. I've been a speaker all over the world, and I've been in Chile, and I love the. In fact, when I went to Chile, I came back with spurs. And my wife said, "What in the world did you get spurs for?" Well, these guys had spurs and they were singing and they were great. And I said,
The
it was
gaucho
so,
culture.
yes, it was so nice to see that. And I said, I just wanted to get them. I says, well, you haven't worn. I says, I'm going to do it. I have my cowboy boots or something, so to put my spurs on. But sometimes the enthusiasm of that particular culture, their ability to celebrate who they are, is contagious. And I think that's what I want to encourage. It's like we had out here in Agoura Hills, there's a place where they had a correctional facility for young people there. And the frightening thing was they could access the internet, but the only thing they would access were things that were not necessarily constructive. And I said, why aren't you capturing the stories of the people who have left and found their way back to society and are making a contribution? Why don't you find out who are the people who have left or alumni of this and made it out, and how do they get out? And then put that on the TV screens. Let them see examples of people who are making a difference. And I think if I were looking at what you would be doing, and I'm just challenging you to be thinking about how do I find the heroes out there that are making me proud? That are doing things that say that's somebody. I mean, now, because I will tell you legitimately, I think there's a lot of concern regarding, quote, illegal immigration, and that is a concern to a lot of Americans. But that should never be confused with the reality that there are immigrants from cultures that are making a huge contribution to who we are.
Hmm.
So, what I would want to do is I want to say, let's capture the story. Let's capture the story of how our culture has made a difference here, um, how we're part of that melting pot mosaic. Maybe a mosaic is a better. Melting means we kind of lose some of it, but more of a patchwork quilt. And we're part of that. We have a unique color, a unique patch. And how can we find stories that makes our people proud and then collect that? When we wrote this book about Put the Torpe Hare and Jones Abraham's son, number one, when we finished, it took us a long time, but I think if I were doing it today with current examples or even in the last 50 years, I'd make it more narrative. If I could have pictures, I'd have some pictures in it, but I want to capture the heroes that our young people can identify with and learn from and build their own story around. Because, I mean, like I sent a copy of my book to the King of Sweden, right? Because an ancestor put the Torpa here, met Jones Abrahamson near the end of his life because he had heard about this big Swede from southern Sweden. So when he was down there visiting, he had to meet him.
Hmm.
So this king, who was relatively small in stature, comes up to Jones Abrahamson, and he is so excited about meeting the king that he grabs his hand and he squeezes so hard he actually injured the king's hand.
Oh, wow.
And so the king leaves there and said, "I'm never going to shake the hand from any man from Smallland again." And but he said also, he said, "I think if Hercules had met this man, he would have found his match. He would not be able to defeat him." So that story I included in the book because we have the name of the king. I sent it to the king, and you want to know something, Enrique, today?
Yeah.
I got an email from the king today.
Wow.
He thanked me for sending the book. And one of his courts emailed me and said His Majesty, I really appreciated receiving the book and wanted to thank you for being involved. Now, and it was in English, obviously, so I wrote back and said, when I have it in Swedish, we'll send you another copy. But so this book now is also being sold in Sweden at the museum in Småland, where they have a display of my ancestor. They have some of his boots that literally you could fit both of your feet in one boot. They're so huge.
Wow.
And they have this display of his story and statues and art from that particular of him. And so it's like that museum for children that come there, bring him to life. And now they'll be able to take that book that we've written and take it home and read it. Most Swedish people read English very
Hmm.
well because many of their relatives in past time, in the 1800s, there were famines and difficult times. So many Swedes came to the United States. All of my relatives came in the middle 1800s to live in Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and that whole area.
Michigan.
Yes, exactly. So we had that whole area because it was very similar in climate to
Hmm.
Sweden. So they were all farmers. My one of my, let's see, it'd be my great grandfather started the Kirkland Swedish Lutheran church there, and there were four members initially, and they did their services in Swedish. And when we actually went to Sweden one other time, we met a woman who was 90 something. She was in her 90s, and she was the youngest daughter of that person who one of the original relatives who came over from Sweden. And she had so much wanted to join her brother that she stayed with her mom and dad and then decided that she was going to come to the United States and leave her mom and dad. Well, she was a singer. And so the way she paid to get over on the ship was to sing for the people on the ship. So she would sing, and that paid her way to get to the United States. She was in New York and then got a telegram from her dad. Her mother had died and she had to go back. He needed her. So she never got to see her brothers again that had moved to Illinois and that whole area. Well, when we went to Sweden, we were the first relatives that she met.
Wow.
And she was so excited to see us. And I wished I had a camera. I would have recorded it because she sang the songs that she sang on board the ship. And she told her stories about this put the torpe hair, that he had the hands the size of toilet seats. And I go, well, I hope they weren't our hands, our toilet seats. That's pretty big. But she was brought up in that same culture. Those same stories had impacted her. And and again, it was a positive image. The man helped his neighbors when there was a fire. He lifted up the livestock trough of water, climbed a ladder and threw the water because he was so strong he was able to do that. And but he always helped the community. And so those stories allowed him to cement on the part of a hero. So I'd be saying to every family I interacted with, who are your heroes? Who are the people you looked up to? You know, how do we capture their story? How do we maybe get some of them on Spanish United? I mean,
Mhm.
just say if you recommend somebody for us to interview that has made a difference, and I can interview them how they did that and how they got here and how they assimilated and how they've made a difference for their community and for their family. Let them tell their story. You may very interestingly find a way to get a book out of that, the
Mhm.
collection of those stories, the
Well,
men and women of Spanish heritage that are making a difference here in the United States. I don't know. I'm just throwing out ideas, but I think a child reading a book like that would feel proud of their heritage.
oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I'm actually writing several books. Like I've actually written a few books. One had to do with ICE. Has to do with children whose parents have been deported and how many of those children stay behind. And I also wrote another story about time traveling, which represents the five major Hispanic countries of Latin America and having to deal with their histories and how they're able to bring it into American cultures. So, but that
Oh, I
would
love
be
it.
that would be a good idea where I could bring people and interview them, for Spanish United, and like I said, make a book for it because I'm always trying to promote education and also history so that way we could know where we come from, so that way we could teach future generations and how to build a good, honest, healthy society.
I had a good friend of mine who was a speaker who just a positive gentleman, and his name was Charlie Tremendous Jones, and he was just a real character. But he'd say the only way you can get beyond your own experience is by reading or doing. And he said, reading allows you to bring in people into your life who have wisdom and experiences that expand who you are. And so he was a huge supporter of reading. And he would bring people from the inner city to his place in Pennsylvania, and he would regale them with story and give them books to read. And I think we are losing that skill,
Yeah.
and that's the scary part because then you're left with what does media do? And also not even just media, it's what do we search for? We search for the bad news. See, I mean, it's so easy to have that be what leads. I had a NBC Nightly News guy. I asked him, I said, why is it always such negative news? I mean, he said, Terry, we have very good data. We are indeed judged by how many people watch our shows. I mean, we have advertising, and advertisers want to know what our share of the market is and the eyeballs for that particular time. And then he said, for every day of the week, we have past footage of past disasters and past crimes. So if there's no current one, we can have an anniversary of an old one. So what ends up happening is every time there is something that's negative, I splash that on and I end up putting myself in a position where the stories pull us back as opposed to moving us forward.
Hmm.
I and I don't know there are enough negative things that happen within any given culture, and we need to hold people accountable. I don't care what your race, background, whoever it is. But there are so many good people that our responsibility is to honor them, let them speak, let them be heroes for our young, so that they have something to aspire to that lets them know we're counting on you to make a difference. I mean, really,
Absolutely.
that's the I think when kids are aspired to make a difference, um, and we look for ways that they do, it shapes them in a really powerful way. So I think that's what, in my mind, when we put this together, and we have Thompson Catalog is the catalog. It's a scan disc company, and they sell books to the Scandinavian market and bookstores and stuff like that around the country. And I'm sure there are Spanish book locations as well. But what has happened is the book itself, because it's about a real person and the illustrations are good, we just got another word today that they've run out of books. They need more books. So they're ordering more books because it's a very popular book, because the art is good, the story is true, and there's history in the back that they can look at.
Hmm.
So it's like it's so unique. And Paul Bunyan has always been an interesting character in America. So this is kind of the Swedish Paul Bunyan, this Sweden's gentle giant, and it's
Hmm.
attracting a lot of readers. So what that means is that we'll be sending them some more books that they can make available to people. And as far as I'm concerned, it's a gift to our culture. It's a gift to the people who can share that with their children, so that they can say, we come from a Swedish background. This is a story of someone from that area that made a
Hmm.
difference. And at the same time, know that they're part of America.
Absolutely.
And
Well, anyway, not to cut you off, but we have a minute less, minute left.
sure,
But I wanted to tell you thank you so much for being on the show, and for all the listeners that are listening. We are on all social media platforms. We're on Spanish United, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Anyone that wants to reach out to us, feel free to send me a direct message. And as soon as I'm finished with the recording, I will definitely send you the link. You could share it with all of your
sure.
colleagues. Thank
I
you so
love
much,
it.
Terry.
Well, I just want you to know, I want to tell your people out there, if you got heroes, send it to Enrique so he can get them on this. There you go. I appreciate it. Thank you for letting me join you.
Likewise, have yourself a good evening.